Welcome to the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show, a broadcast service of globalbusinessnews.net.
This episode from the meeting room of Global TV Talk Show is brought to you by
The Bridge School, the accredited international online private school of choice, at bridgek12.org.
Porch Light Rental and Destination Services. Reduce your renter lump sum or managed relocation costs. Visit them at porchlightrental.com.
And by airs.com. With our full range of services, we can help design and manage your international relocation. Find us at airs.com.
Primestone Partners, featuring corporate, government, and developer housing solutions, as well as senior-level advisory services. Find them at primestonepartners.com.
And by International Auto Source. We are the vehicle experts for expats, featuring all major brands of automobiles with flexible solutions and financing. On the web at intlauto.com.
Become a global player in your field.
Cross Culture to Go provides virtual support for your global business and career success.
We can help you thrive in 140 plus countries and markets.
On the web at crossculturetogo.com.
This is Ed Cohen, your broadcast host on Global TV Talk Show. This is a service of globalbusinessnews.net, which has been around since '03, and Google Analytics has measured 1.2 million reader page views on that site since then, over 100 countries. Global TV Talk Show started as a result of the pandemic on or about March 1, 2020. We have produced almost 200 programs, many of them connected with the talent mobility management industry and all things related. A key part of that is immigration. Our special guest today is Michael Turansick in the Chicago area. Michael has been a partner, a senior partner with Fragaman worldwide. Michael, hello, welcome, and please reintroduce yourself more formally than I just did.
Well, thank you, Ed. I appreciate it. It's really good to see you. Again, I really appreciate the invitation. As you said, my name is Michael Turansick. I am currently senior counsel at Fragaman, global immigration law firm. And I have spent over 30 years in the immigration and global mobility sector, primarily dealing with U.S. issues, but also having an extensive level of experience with international immigration questions. So brief introduction. Ed, you're up.
Yes, you've been speaking a lot when we could in our live meetings, not only mine, but several others. And I really appreciate that and the firm's involvement for sure for such a long time. So the Biden administration came in like a breath of fresh air, but things have gotten a little haywire. So why don't you explain briefly the current situation about immigration and fixing things? We'll get to the border issue later. So let's just talk about, all right, what's going on? Are there people coming in or not?
Well, yes, there are, but there are still constraints on the ability of individuals from many countries to get here easily. And that's really the number one issue, I think, facing the global mobility industry, particularly with respect to the United States today, is the difficulty for individuals from many of the developed countries to have easy access. As an overview, getting back to the initial point about the Biden administration, their challenge has been enormous. There was a statistic, there was an online tracking system that indicated there was over 1,000 different changes to immigration policy during the prior administration, large and small, obviously. And as you can imagine, it's going to take time to really change some of those policies, unravel some of the things that really were maybe not in the best interest of our nation, and then really move the country forward. Sort of the analogy like trying to turn an aircraft carrier. It's going to take time. Having said that, their focus has been on refugees, asylum, border issues, right? That's been the focus. There have been humanitarian challenges at the border that were the first priority of the administration. So many of those issues were the top priority. Employment-based immigration, global mobility issues have not had the same focus, although there have been changes.
So currently, and this is August 5, year 2021, excuse me, because of the wind down of the military engagement in Afghanistan, there's a rescue resettlement thing going on now. It's thousands of Afghans who are being brought over emergency, and they're being stationed for the time being anyway in military bases around the US. And so this is immigration, and there's sort of a blanket diplomatic thing, isn't it?
Well, good. Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because in terms of prioritization at consular posts abroad, the resolution and providing immigrant visas to those Afghanis and those Iraqis who had worked for the U.S. military, many for years, if not longer, is a top priority right now. It's one of the top priorities of the administration of the State Department in issuing visas. And how that affects global mobility, very basically, is the consulates are operating at reduced capacity because of COVID. You know, the hours are restricted, the number of staff in the consulates, that's restricted as well. The number of appointments that they're granting, similarly restricted. So that means that the spill down, you know, the ability of these consulates to handle immigrant visas for, you know, international, you know, multinational companies is reduced correspondingly. So it's a high priority for the administration, and it has, you know, a not insignificant impact on the ability of the consulates to process lower tiered, lesser prioritized visas.
So let's talk now just a bit about the kind of northern border, the Canadian situation. I don't know if it's a tragedy, but the interest level in Toronto and Canada as a destination for high-tech people is really ratcheted up the past year because of the backlog and the slowdowns here in the US. Now, a lot of the companies have already opened up, particularly right over the northwest border of Seattle into Vancouver, which is a lovely, beautiful area. And Microsoft and, well, everybody is up there. And so it's an easy shift for them to retain talent, but not in the US. So, and there's some movement now, other than the variant, the pandemic variant, which is messing things up for everybody. Things were opening up, and now they're sort of not.
So yeah, so again, with respect to the Canadian border, that's a trend that's been, you know, in existence for some time. Certainly, U.S. immigration procedures and backlogs and processes were not simple before COVID. There were delays, there were bureaucratic barriers to immigration. Certainly, in the prior administration, there's documented evidence that the rate of refusals and requests for additional evidence increased substantially, as did processing time. So, you know, in that connection, that was already a process and a policy decision that many companies were already embarking on. Made worse, I think, by COVID. I think certainly COVID has exacerbated that to some extent. And, you know, it's easier now for individuals, particularly, you know, if you're a Canadian national working for a U.S. company, to be up in Canada working from home. There's a lot more remote work for companies in the United States, companies doing business in the United States during the pandemic.
Well, as I mentioned, today is August 5, and the Congress, U.S. Congress, is still in session, which is a little unusual, but they're dealing with, amongst other things, the, what do you call it, the infrastructure bill, which is huge. 2,700 pages. I haven't read it, but I've got blips and sections.
Right.
It's, if it all happens, who knows, but it's going to have the impact of the late 50s, early 60s, when the interstate highway system was developed, and all the land development associated with all of the interchanges and the whatever, right? So, I mean, it's huge impact it's going to remake the economy, and probably buried within that has a lot to do with Make Things in America. And of course, helping fix the grid, the electrical grid, cybersecurity, everything will be impacted by this. So personally speaking, I think there's going to be a huge demand for the best talent in the world to want to work in the US, not maybe become citizens, but get jobs working in what is going to be an explosion of business opportunity here. What do you think?
No, I think that's a really valid point. It is, I think, the most massive infrastructure piece of legislation passed by Congress in many decades, and certainly long overdue. I'm sure maybe it's not the same in California, but in Chicago, our roads and bridges are really not in great shape. It's really sometimes you put your car at risk driving down some of our highways right now. But the point, I think the point you make is absolutely correct. I would add on to it and say, I think there's going to be demand for workers at all levels, not just the highly skilled. This is going to be a massive undertaking at multiple levels to repair and restore our infrastructure. So there will be demand for more workers, which bodes well for both U.S. employment numbers as well as our economy. But inevitably, there will be skill shortages. And I think that goes to your point about the fact that this will have an impact upon immigration. There will be a need for tech workers, there'll be a need for engineers, there'll be a need for workers who are actually going to be doing the construction. So
it's not part of the bill, although I wish it were. And just to jump aside, but on the same topic here, as we go a little deeper into the administration and court decisions, which I'd like you to address. Out here in the West, I'm sure you already know, and the audience knows this, that there's a drought. Although we've had thunderstorms and monsoon rains, but it comes down in buckets and then dries up.
Right.
So, but other than that, the reservoirs are not being refilled. And that is pretty scary, actually, because there's millions of people here. So I came up with the idea. It's like a moonshot idea. It's not new ideas. It's just that they're spending so much money on all this infrastructure stuff. There's nothing more important than clean water. And for a lot of reasons, agriculture, irrigation, safety, health, and putting people to work on Made in America projects. So I said, well, why don't we have the pipeline companies, whether it's Enbridge or whoever, build pipelines from New Orleans and the Gulf states to take all that excess rainfall and ship it out here to California, and with a stop in Vegas and Phoenix along the way, and fill up the reservoirs, and that will put all the engineers back to work. It will create a blue collar surge of honest work and, needed public works. And I'm sure the Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan people will love to float revenue bonds to help paying for it, because water will be the new oil.
That was exactly my point. I was thinking is that, in this century, energy has been the critical resource, has exploded in importance as a critical resource. And actually in the past century, the 20th century, that was certainly the case. In the 21st century, there are a number of academic studies that suggest that over time, over the course of the next 50, 60, 70 years, water is going to be that critical resource, because it's even more fundamental than energy in some respects. So, I think that, it's an infrastructure priority, and all of these infrastructure priorities are going to have trickle down effects, including employment and the need for more tech workers, which, every industry requires tech workers right now. There's nothing that's not affected by technology. So, that's sort of how this, I guess, all rolls back into immigration, is because so much of the tech sector has been, for decades now, relying upon foreign talent.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a timely announcement.
Hi, I'm Sergey Gorbatov.
I'm Angela Lane.
Together, we are researchers, writers, and practitioners in the field of human resources.
And we've also been multi-country, multi-assignment career expats.
We owe our professional development and growth to a very large extent to the international assignment opportunities that we have had.
But in a world where distributed work may become the norm, we also want to understand what will happen to the nature, duration, and purpose of international assignments.
Together with our colleague, Julian Dalzell from the University of South Carolina, we're undertaking a study on the future of expatriation.
And we'd value your contribution. You can participate in this important study by completing a simple 10-minute questionnaire.
Access the questionnaire by typing in your browser tinyurl.com/expert study. That's tinyurl.com/expert study. You can also find the link here on Ed's website next to this video.
Thank you for joining us in this study. In return for your contribution, we'll provide you with a copy of our research.
And of course, you'll be invited to an exclusive webinar hosted by Ed, where we will share our findings right here on Global Business News.
And so please go to tinyurl.com/expat study. Take the survey so that we can better understand the future of expatriation.
Something that's really neat is that the Bridge School partners with various organizations to provide learning for their students. For example, we partner with a major ballet company, and we are able to enroll several of their students into our school. So now not only is the student able to participate in a school and have a seamless transition while they're very active in their ballet career, but now they have other dancers that are with them that are doing some of the same courses. So it's almost becoming a camaraderie where they're taking similar courses, they're working together on their ballet, and really being able to form this great partnership with these organizations to provide a needed service. A lot of times there are student athletes who will spend hours and hours at the gym or at the basketball courts, wherever it is. And if they're attending a traditional school, they're in school from 8 to 3. They get a quick snack, and then they're at the gym for 3 to 4 hours in the evening. Coming to us and having that partnership, they're able to break that up throughout the day. They can have a morning practice, get some schooling in, have an afternoon practice, finish their schooling in the evening. So there's that flexibility. And additionally, if there are tournaments or performances, it's fantastic because if there's a week where they have shows straight through, they can take that week off of learning and then pick back up when they're done. So it offers this great flexibility. And for the program owners of these sports leagues, it is a win-win situation for them because they see this need. They see this need that their students need to make sure that they are obtaining the grades necessary to be successful adults in our country and in other countries. But it provides them an environment where they can be successful at both.
To what extent in the prior to pandemic days, Indians were the largest, I think, number of immigrants, but also Chinese, but all kinds of people. Right. To what extent did they work in the energy business, or was it just the tech side of any business?
Well, I think it was, my short answer is it was pervasive. And certainly the consulting companies would represent energy companies. They would be hired by energy companies to do work at multiple levels within the organization. So I think any of the large name technology companies have had or have energy related clients in their portfolio. So it's really not that black and white. I think there are layers to it. And the technology companies themselves also have robust, or the energy companies, I should say, have robust technology operations.
So on another brainstorm idea having to do with water, right across the street is the Pacific Ocean. And so, and there's some desalinization going on in California, but it's really tiny. But that could be like a whole other massive public works project to desalinate the Pacific Ocean, and the water's right there. We just have to make it healthy.
Right.
And,
No, I'm a little over a mile from Lake Michigan as we speak right now, so I understand the issue. And that you raised the I think the most important point is making it healthy. And I think again, there have been studies about desalination that go back decades, because it is, there is such a large resource readily available. And frankly, I think most of the issues have been cost effectiveness. I think there will come a time when the price point, when the delta is reached, where it is effective to have massive, desalination operations. I don't think it's been that way yet.
So let's go back to the law and the recent court cases having to do with immigration. And I'm just looking at the notes here. Recent court cases have, like with DACA,
Right.
what is going on? All these kids, they're not kids anymore. They've been here. They're
in
like
their 20s
almost
and
our
30s.
age.
Yeah, they're in their 20s. Yeah. Well, let's not get carried away, Ed. But but I think so what's happened recently? A federal judge in Texas ruled on a lawsuit brought by several state attorney generals, on the legality of the Obama era presidential proclamation that granted deferred action status to what were collectively known as dreamers, children brought to the United States as minors by their parents, essentially brought here, without any intent, not on their own. And there are hundreds of thousands of, individuals who have been granted DACA benefits over the past several years. I've represented many of them. I've employed them in my office, and they are as American as we are, but for the fact that they were brought here as minors by their parents, generally illegally. So that's sort of the backdrop. And the issue was the court found that the Obama administration did not follow required and legal procedures, the Administrative Procedures Act, in issuing its proclamation, and then set aside the DACA provision. As a technical matter, the order only limited the government from granting new DACA benefit requests. So individuals who are in the United States, and this is a really important point, with DACA benefits already, can continue to work, can continue to stay here, can continue to extend their benefits. So, and I think that that's just a realization that this decision was very likely to be appealed. And in fact, President Biden said that almost immediately, that his Department of Justice was going to continue to pursue this in the courts through the appeals. Will probably make its way up to the Supreme Court, which means that there's a long arc. This is going to take year, 2 years, maybe more, to be finally resolved. Certainly 2022 at the earliest for this to be resolved by the Supreme Court. Now, having said that, that's not the real answer. The answer for DACA is for Congress to pass legislation granting benefits to dreamers. It has literally been over 20 years, or at least approximately 20 years, since the first dreamer legislation was introduced in the Senate. And for largely political reasons, because support for dreamers is bipartisan and pretty overwhelming, for political reasons, it's never been enacted and it's never become law. So that's the need right now. Congress needs to find a way to get that done. In the meantime, USCIS has indicated that it will try to fix the problems that the court identified with the decision, which is to say, follow the proper rules for issuing a regulation, notice and comment, opportunity for individuals to review the proposal and provide the government with input. And that can take months, if not longer, to complete the regulatory review process. But again, I think the clearest and best approach would be for legislation to be passed by Congress and sent to the president's desk, which creates, at least a definite, a legal status and a long-term status for dreamers.
Well, I hope so. That certainly makes sense, doesn't it? So,
Well, the individuals are part of our community. They've gone to college. They've served in the military. They're members of our social community. They go to church. They're part of our church groups. They're just part of America at this point. And the idea of them leaving is sort of antithetical, in my opinion, to American values, as well as completely impractical.
So is there? Let's talk about the divided Congress, and go a little deeper there, and how that is impacting the visa consular application backlog, and this EB-5 investment scheme.
Let's put EB-5 for a minute, but talk about Congress. I mean, we could spend the entire podcast talking about the issues with Congress right now, and even this morning. The Senate Minority Leader is threatening to block efforts to increase the U.S. debt limit over the big reconciliation bill that the Democrats are proposing. So, they've been playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots. I had that game when I was a kid. I don't know if you remember it, where you have the two boxers in the ring and they just punch at each other. They've been doing that for years. Yeah, you got it. Yeah. I'll see if I can find it. We can play it sometime next time I see you. So Congress is divided. As many of the people listening to this know, it's a 50-50 Senate. And I believe there is about a 3-vote Democratic majority in the House, which is to say razor thin for most issues. And that's really impeded a lot of progress on immigration. So it's unfortunate, but there are areas where there is, generally speaking, common agreement. DACA is a clear example of that. The Dreamers, there's Democrats and Republicans have supported legislation over the years. I think you've got people like Dick Durbin, a Democratic senator from Illinois, and Lindsey Graham, a Republican senator from South Carolina, both supporting legislation to provide legal status to Dreamers. So you've got both parties, but it can't get through the process because of a lot of other political issues. The most prominent right now being the issues at the southern border. So that's tying up a lot of immigration proposals in Congress.
I need to have to just adjust this a little bit here. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about southern border. That's a mess. Okay, so we just can't let the people in, and we don't even know if they're healthy or not wealthy for sure. But I mean, it makes sense to me. I'm a broadcaster. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not anything other than that. It's just that it makes sense that we can't send them back, but we have to see if they're healthy. And, it would be ridiculous to let in people who don't know how to speak English and can't communicate, because they'll be handicapped and they'll be a burden to themselves, never mind to USA. But on the other hand, what do you do with these people? America's always been a receptor, a beacon of safety. Mm-hmm. I'm not a politician.
I wish I had a soundbite answer to the problem at the southern border, but it has existed. You can make arguments that it started back in the 1960s and 1970s when guest worker programs that facilitated the entry of Mexicans to work in the agricultural community, particularly in the Southwest, expired. They were allowed to terminate. So we have created over the course of generations this demand for that workforce, but legislatively we've cut off the supply. So that has led to decades of undocumented immigration across the border because employers still have the need, right? Even though the law doesn't allow it. In terms of the surge, whatever you want to call it, some people call it a surge. I'm really not going to get caught into the discussion about the terminology, but the reality is that conditions in the Northern Triangle, because of storms, earthquakes, economic and political discord, they're frankly suffering at a level that is unprecedented, at least compared to what Americans believe, in American standards. And while there are many, I would say, there are individuals who are coming to the United States, or trying to come to the United States across the southern border for economic reasons, there are also individuals who have legitimate claims for refugee status, individuals who have been persecuted, gang membership, people, I've gone to the border, I've represented individuals pro bono. And in many parts of those countries, the gangs are really the dominant political governmental force. In the cities, it's maybe a little different than it is in some of the rural districts where I even heard stories where police officers were afraid to wear their uniforms going to work or from work because they didn't want the gangs to know where they lived. And that's a pretty sad state of affairs when the police are afraid, right? You can't have a functioning society if the people required to enforce the law are afraid for their own safety. So it's a really complex issue. I agree with you. There is a need to make sure, particularly during a pandemic, that we're not making things worse for U.S. citizens and U.S. residents, because obviously one of the main functions of the government is to protect its citizenry. But it's a really tough question. I think there are mechanisms to have a controlled, reasonable process for determining who's a legitimate applicant and who's not going to be eligible for asylum. And under U.S. asylum law, there's no provision for economic immigrants. That's not a basis for asylum in the United States. But we need to process these individuals, and unfortunately, our system is not very efficient. So if you make a good faith claim initially under existing law, you're probably allowed to stay here for the year or 2 years or how many years that it takes our government to process the claim. So it's a complicated issue. I think it's really something that, again, would require Congress and the executive branch to work a little bit more closely. Unfortunately, that's just not been happening. I think the Biden administration, to its credit, I'm not trying to be political here because immigration is a bipartisan issue. They have tried to address some of the root causes of the problem, which is, why is it so bad in these countries that individuals who've lived there for 20, 30, 40 years now feel the need to leave their homes, their families, their life.
So the Northern Triangle is what? Nicaragua?
Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. So
I'm sorry, El Salvador.
El Salvador. Okay. And so they have to go through Mexico.
Right.
And the Mexican government apparently allows that, but then they get blocked and then it becomes Mexico's problem.
It did. And that was part of the Remain in Mexico policy of the prior administration, which essentially provided that the individuals wishing to make asylum claims would have to wait literally on the other side of the Mexican-U.S. border for the government to process their claim. The personal challenges of that, in my opinion, in families living in 10 cities for weeks and months at a time, being subjected to deprivation at several levels, being subject to physical abuse, being to crime, that was not maybe America's brightest shining moment in history and how we treated these individuals. It's a very complicated issue. The Remain in Mexico policy has been terminated by this administration, and they're in the process of winding that down as we speak. But Mexico worked with the United States, at least to some extent, to try to manage this problem, at least in the early stages.
Been talking with Michael Turansick, expert on immigration-related issues. Michael, how can people get in touch with you?
Okay, the easiest way to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn. I have a very active LinkedIn profile. I try to post on issues that I think are interesting to me on a weekly basis, if not more. So that would be the number one way to do it. And I have 2 email addresses that I use frequently. One is my personal email address, which is first initial last name, mturansick@yahoo.com. And then there's my business address, which is mturansick@fragomen.com. I'm on both. I would say getting in touch with me with LinkedIn is pretty good because it pops up on my cell phone, even if I'm away from my desk. So I see those a lot more frequently or a lot more quickly. But there are several ways to get in touch with me. Those would probably be the most obvious. So,
thanks for being my guest on Global TV Talk Show, and please come back soon.
It's a pleasure. There's so much to talk about in terms of immigration, and It's constantly changing, as we can even see in the news of the last few days in terms of what the president's going to do about some of these travel restrictions that exist right now. So hopefully in the next few weeks that will be opening up. But thank you, Ed, for inviting me. So good to see you again, and let's talk again real soon.
Thanks. That's Michael in Chicago area, and I'm in LA Metro, 7,000 feet above LA in Big Bear Lake. Take care.
Thank you for joining us in the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show.
Have a wonderful day, and stay safe.